Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome again to our work with the Treatise on White Magic. We're on the 38th video commentary. We're about a third of the way through the book, and we're on page 166. And DK is reminding us that the Master works with the soul aspect of humanity. We sometimes forget that. And of all forms, and does not work with our astral bodies. This has often been forgotten by teachers in both the East and the West. I would say that in his work with his group members, his students who were accepted disciples on the periphery of his ashram, he did make strong recommendations regarding their personality, habits, and functioning. But then who's to know what additional work he may have done internally to help with the fulfillment of their potential. Going on here then, in working with souls, the true technique of evolution is carried forward, for it is the soul within the forms in every kingdom and nature which is responsible for the developing work of and within the form. Okay, so the soul or consciousness promotes evolutionary development, or expansion and deepening, let's put it that way, of the soul or consciousness within every form, promotes evolutionary development, and we might say even of the form. Always consciousness comes first, which is a kind of a dictum that is hard for many people to accept because they think of all things as a derivative of matter. Okay. I'm really hoping, there we go. Okay. Somehow there was this on the screen, and I'm hoping that it was not too disturbing if it did occur. Anyway, here we are on the correct page. May I say, therefore, to students that their main objective is to become aware of the soul, to cultivate soul consciousness, and to learn to live and work as souls. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? I mean, really. So this, but obviously it's not. This is a simple yet difficult requirement. May I say, therefore, to students that their main objective is to become aware of the soul. It's a subtle matter, but we can sometimes recognize the soul by the streams of higher inspiration which appear to us, which seem to enter our energy system and consciousness. We can recognize those streams as induced by the soul. Until such a time as their use of their apparatus becomes voluntary. And we're a long way from that, aren't we? In other words, we recognize that things happen, but we cannot yet at will use the inner apparatus. So let's just say that most cannot yet at will employ the inner apparatus. So until all of this inner development, slowly occurring, becomes subject to the will, they, the students, would be well advised to train their minds, study the laws governing manifestation, and learn to include all that which we now cover by the word higher. It's a misnomer, but it must suffice. Obviously, there's no up or down. There is the intensification, the speeding up of vibration, and thus greater sensitivity to energy currents of higher vibration. So until we become really practical occultists with our faculties subject to will, excuse me, the practical, with our faculties subject to will, we must train the mind. Study the laws, study and train, and learn to include everything that we now call higher. And that's what we are engaged in doing. You know, it may seem impractical simply to study, but we are preparing for a time when the secrets of practical occultism will be conferred upon us. That is, once we have demonstrated our trustworthiness and our readiness. Okay. Now, going further. Let's see, this was the first factor. So our main job, to become aware of the soul, cultivate soul consciousness, and learn to live and work as souls. I mean, you know, it's so straightforward, really. Second factor, this book is filled with wise advice. When the use of the subjective instrument becomes voluntary, and a man knows how it should be employed when he is using it and can discontinue its use or resume it at will. You know, sometimes things take you over and you can't let go of them. They continue to drive you, or even, as the word has been spoken, terrorize the one who has created the thought form which is not properly descending. So, so until he can either use it or not use it or discontinue its use or resume it at will, then his whole status changes and his usefulness increases. So he becomes a skillful, voluntary server who can serve at will and not simply have to wait for the coming upon him of this or that stream of energy or force. Okay, then our whole status will change. Right now, though, I mean, this would make the truly practical, practical or practical esotericist or occultist. Esotericist, that's correct. Esotericist, right. Through the use of the mind, humanity must become aware of the purposes and employment of the physical apparatus. Humanity has become aware of that. And that's taken a long time. There are periods of when the inner subtle man is not considered, and knowledge of that inner man is obscured. Always the priests or the deep esotericists have maintained this knowledge, but it has not always been widespread. Through the use of the mind, humanity has become aware of the purposes and employment of the physical apparatus. There's such a great accumulation of material in the medical field, let us say. Now, through the use of a still higher faculty, which is a characteristic of the soul, he enters into voluntary and intelligent control of his instrument and learns to understand the purposes for which it exists, and this higher faculty is the intuition. So, a future step is indicated. Excuse me. And the entire lower mechanism can eventually be controlled by the intuition. Although this is not necessarily the same as looking to the intuition for the answer to personal problems. It is the control of the lower man for larger group and planetary purposes. And he is saying, interestingly enough, that the intuition is a characteristic of the soul. And certainly what we call the soul absorbs a degree of the higher and freer intuition. So this is what we want, the voluntary and intelligent control of the instrument, and to learn why it exists. And now we're talking about the entire personality. The intuition, the soul and the intuition ride much higher than the focus of the personality in the lower three worlds. May I add with emphasis that only as a man becomes intuitive does he become of use in a master's group, and I commend to all aspirants that they carefully study the meaning and significance of the intuition. Now, in our work in Glamour, a World Problem, we have been studying the intuition and its three characteristics of illumination, understanding, and what was the final one? Love. Illumination, understanding, and love. And thus it demonstrates, it is not to be confused with psychism, which so often obscures the intuition. Rather, it is to be focused on large issues which negate the importance or the very circumscribed importance of the personality. It's a circumscribed consciousness which thinks the personality is most important. The ring past not widens under Neptune, under Jupiter, and group affairs, national affairs, planetary affairs, the affairs of humanity are the focus. So this is about the importance of the intuition, even though it is not fully released in its cosmic physical plane potentials until the Antakarana is really built and functioning. Though, as I say, there is a degree of absorption of the intuition in what we normally call the soul on the higher mental plane, focused particularly on the third and second subplane of the higher mental plane. When it begins to function, then the disciple can pass from the stage of probation to that of acceptance in a master's group. Now, naturally, we would tend to ask, whether all the students which Master DK accepted as accepted disciples had a sufficient degree of the intuition developed. DEV, DVP, developed. DVD, okay. sometimes when you read the letters that he wrote to them, it seems that they were struggling very much in their emotional body, in their mind, and in the personality nature. Dinah 1, we remember, is a book that we are supposed to use to draw worthy students towards the ashram. So hidden in this book is a whole method of approach to the ashram, especially the first 100 and the last 100 pages approximately. So now we're studying the intuition from quite a practical point of view, and the intuition is necessitated for acceptance in a master's group, and is what is called here acceptance in a master's group, equivalent to accepted discipleship. Let's see, I have a certain stubborn streak here. Accepted discipleship, okay. You might ask here how this can be known or ascertained by the probationer. When the intuition is sufficiently functioning, when the probationer is ready to move forward into a master's group. A great deal of training is given to the probationer without his really recognizing it consciously. And we might even say that in the first number of years that Master DK was working with the what was to become 9 or 10 seed groups, much training was given. He did not so consciously address the groups as groups of accepted disciples. Maybe occasionally he said that to an individual, but later, when the group of 24 emerged, the new seed group, he quite consciously talked to them and about them as accepted disciples. So as a probationer, and under the master's eye, and as a chela in the light, we might say, under the supervision of a higher disciple on the inner planes, there is training, necessary training given, and we're not quite fully conscious of it, maybe not conscious at all. False tendencies are indicated to him as he seeks with sincerity to train himself for service. Now, let's just say this was always occurring in the Dinah letters. So false tendencies are indicated to him, and he is sincere in training himself, and the analysis of motive, when truthfully undertaken, serves amazingly to lift the would-be disciple out of the astral or emotional world into that of the mind. Let us remember that. As I see it, I'm recalling some encounters that I've had with various disciples that I wished I could have helped more. And I see here what would have helped. Analysis of motive, when truthfully undertaken, not trying to hide from oneself, really, really wanting to see one's nature as if one were conducting a scientific experiment and truth were the more important thing and not the comfort of that object, namely ourselves, that the mind is turned upon. So let's remember that, and always try to find a way when we are doing things to detect the underlying motive. It is in the mental world that the masters are first contacted, and what does it say here? And there they must be sought. Oh goodness, that of course makes me want to make it even bigger. Oh, goodness, it is an amazing thought, and runs counter to the presumptions of so many people who are sensitive to astral currents and even to images of the master in the astral field that they mistake for the real presence. And as DK said, there was this kind of, astral thought form of him running around offering good words of mediocre cheer. I have to always, I'm amused when I hear that, because, we like that pat on the back, and we like to be affirmed and perhaps have good things said of us and have our efforts appreciated. And so this thought form would do that, and probably was built up on the basis of the wish life of many disciples. Let's see if I can kind of find that, I hope I'm right in the words I'm using. Well, that's it. Good words, mediocre. Oh, yes, here it is. Thoughts, brother of mine, are things. They are creative, creating, and created entities. And every time anyone sees the thought form of me and responds to it, he increases its strength and power. From its magnetic aura, my disciples and followers must free themselves. For it is but man's thought of me and not I myself. It can sidetrack and delude you. It can speak good words of mediocre cheer and encouragement, but they are not my words, and this I would have you bear in mind. Just talking to this disciple, your sixth ray personality and your first ray astral body make you prone to this beautiful yet deceptive force flowing from an illusory form. So this is the discussion of that thought form of the master on the astral plane, and it caused plenty of problems for a number of disciples and even damaged them etherically, one or two of them, and probably astrally as well. And DK had to do repair work with them. So often when the master has a chance to say something, it's fairly brief and fairly direct, and he's not wasting time with that proverbial pat on the back unless he really sees the good that can emerge from it. Usually from commendation emerges a reaction which is not good and which is obstructive to future progress. I wonder who this disciple is. I think it was something with an L, maybe it's D. I think, SRD. No, SRD. Right. Well, I could go on a hunt, but I'll leave that to my colleague Elena Dramcini, who is doing great astrological work with the horoscopes of the various disciples, such as we have been able to acquire them. Not the easiest thing in the world, because there was less precision in those days, and I guess astrology, while figuring into the estimation that DK had of every one of his disciples in his groups, it was not the main point. So he very rarely mentions personal astrology or individual astrology in the letters that he has written. But the time has come when the light in the head is not only present, but can be somewhat used, and this is, we would say, whether or not the disciple detects this light. And we do want to remember that even though if the quality of the brain cells is such that it can support and demonstrate the light in the head, there are many people, some quite intuitive and advanced, for whom the light in the head is not visible, at least to them. The karma of the aspirant is such that it becomes possible for him, through strenuously applied effort, to handle his life in such a way that he can not only fulfill his karma and carry out his obligations, but has sufficient determination to enable him to handle the problems and obligations of discipleship also. So there must be a clearing of karma to a degree so that there is time to add to the process of working off karma the additional demands of discipleship, i.e. dharma. Karma and dharma, and so often the two are intertwined as when we follow our dharma, or the purpose and direction of our soul. We oftentimes encounter the karma that pertains to having attempted to do that in the past, or the karma that is interfering with the execution of the dharma. I'm recalling that in the new esoteric schools, you can't even get in unless your karma is sufficiently clear to allow you to do and perform the requirements of these schools. You know, one can say, oh, I wish I could come and join you, but I have such family responsibilities and such financial duties, and I am obliged in the outer world to do this, that, and the other. Well, then the karmic situation was just not yet prepared, and his life circumstances were not yet conducive to the kinds of labors into which he would have to enter when performing within the new esoteric schools, or doing any particular heavy role, performing any particular heavy role of discipleship service. His service to others is carried out with the right motive and is beginning to count and to make its power felt, and he is losing sight of his own interests in those of others. When this occurs, certain esoteric happenings take place. So right motive is so key to release one into true discipleship. So let's just, put that in. The examination and understanding of one's motives and the practice of right motive releases one into true discipleship. Well, some, of us have been in this business for 40 or 50 years. I'm thinking back, I joined the Theosophical Society in 1966, which I guess gives me 52 years now about that I've been heavily, strenuously involved in these matters. And earlier I listened carefully to my teacher, who had about 6 planets in Pisces and Leo rising and a lot of first rays, so I learned impressively about certain things. And it seems a drop in the bucket, this period of study, when I see what has to be learned, what can be learned, and the kind of student that Master DK must have been over centuries to accumulate the knowledge and develop the wisdom which are now evident in his expression. Anyway, we have to be able to do both. Our karma is by no means ended, and there are many unfinished and unresolved issues and disharmonies which have to be harmonized, and yet on to the labors of discipleship we must move and handle, more than one thing at a time. So certain esoteric happenings take place under the service carried out with right motive. And I suppose, most of us are so deeply involved in service right now of one kind or another, and every once in a while an examination of the true motive behind our labors must be undertaken. As we know, DK pretty well told his students in his ashramic group, and by extension all of us, that if we found our way into such a group, it was probably not due to the love of humanity, but for desire for advancement and expansion and spiritual cultivation and all those good things, which, if the sole motive of an individual, could amount to spiritual selfishness. Anyway, his service to others is carried out with the right motive and is beginning to count and make its presence felt. And he is losing sight of his own interests in those of others. DK sometimes spoke of certain spiritual incentives which might be attractive to the masters, rather than simply taking care of the disciples. He says, don't you think we might have a few things we're interested in this universe other than taking care of you? Well, it's parenthood in a way, and while few of us would ever say to our children such a thing, I'm sure that there have been moments of conflict when one's own interests called to one, and yet parental duties had to be minded. Anyway, certain esoteric happenings are taking place. I'm always forgetting what page we started on, 166, Okay, the master confers with some of his senior disciples as to the advisability of admitting the aspirant within the group aura and of blending his vibration with that of the group. Well, it is a group process of consultation, and the disciple, or the higher disciple, who has the chela in the light under supervision will obviously have something of importance to say. Now, probably, we're not aware of that, and if we've been the chela in the light, pursuing our efforts, having taken probably the first initiation, and pursuing the light and attempting to deal with glamour and to serve, we haven't been aware that we've been observed inwardly. Maybe the master is not the main observer, maybe the supervising higher disciple is the main observer, but he or she, however we deal with those things, will have something to say to the master about the advisability of admitting us, given our degree of success in the kind of process in which we are engaged, a process supposedly meant to improve our discipleship and the service going with it. Then, if decision is arrived at, it could be deferred, I suppose. For the space of 2 years, a senior disciple acts as the intermediary betwixt the master and the newly accepted aspirant. So there are technicalities involved here, and a higher disciple supervised a chela in the light, and also for 2 years a still higher disciple, probably still higher, supervises and reports on the newly accepted disciple. Then, if decision is arrived at, for the space of 2 years, a senior disciple acts as the intermediary betwixt the master and the newly accepted aspirant. I wonder if any of us who may think that perhaps we are accepted disciples, and who knows, perhaps we're accepted in this life, if we ever passed through such a period with any kind of awareness, wherein we were under observation and reports were being made, I suppose, about the degree of light and love we managed to manifest. He works with the new disciple, stepping down, if I might so express it, the vibration of the master, so as to accustom the disciples' bodies to the higher increased rate. So this is the task of the supervising disciple during immediately after acceptance. Perhaps some have come into this incarnation already as accepted disciples. I believe there are some references to one who had been an accepted disciple for 4 or 5 lifetimes, and other references to those who would just be entering that closer and more privileged relationship. He impresses the disciple's mind via his ego with the group plans and ideals, and he watches his reaction to life's occurrences and opportunities. He practically assumes pro tem the duties and position of master. So let's call this, let's just say, here is a report on the very responsible work of the supervising disciple for the newly accepted disciple. And of course, such an one could be known to the disciple and in incarnation simultaneously, or could rather be on the inner planes. I think both would be possible, depending, of course, on the capability of a disciple on the outer plane to have direct contact with the master and be able to make direct report. All this time, the aspirant remains in ignorance of what has happened and is unaware of his subjective contacts. Okay, well, that pretty well answers the question. The general rule is that the supervised aspirant or newly accepted disciple is unaware of the inner process. But maybe some things will be recognized, and here Master DK is talking about 3 recognitions which may be emerging. He recognizes in himself 3 things. Okay, increased mental activity. Well, I'm sure many of us have passed through this. I went through a period of my life with so much mental activity that I got dizzy, literally dizzy from all my reading and thinking. I think I overdid it, you know. If you want to study 10 or 12 hours a day, just be careful how you handle it. This at first will give him much trouble, and he will feel as if he were losing in mind control instead of gaining it. But this is only a temporary condition, and gradually he will assume command. So, you know, this is a form of rather unavoidable overstimulation from increasing contact with those who represent the ashram. So the master's vibration is coming down through the supervising disciple. See, the little Chela in the light, accepted disciple. Now, these people who were in Master DK's group and persisted were known as accepted disciples, or told they were, and maybe they were people who were not so very different from who we are. So the possibility of becoming an accepted disciple on the periphery of the ashram certainly does exist, and maybe some already know that they are accepted disciples through one of the 5 methods of recognizing that degree of relationship with the master. You know, turn to discipleship in the New Age, and I think the last 100 pages or so deal with the 6 stages of discipleship. And when we start to talk about accepted discipleship, those 5 methods of recognizing the possibility of accepted discipleship will be discussed. Now, there is, this is number 1. Okay, let's call this 1. We'll call it 1. Okay. Now, the next one will be, we'll call it 2. Increased responsiveness to ideas and increased capacity to vision the plan of hierarchy. I suppose if we continue to read Master DK's work, this would read thoughtfully, that is, and ponder. The responsiveness to ideas would come, and much more about the divine plan will be known. This will make him in the early stages fanatical to a degree, because he thinks that only the plan is important. So, you know, we have to watch out for this sort of 6th ray response. And when you look at some of those early mantrams, they have a lot of the 6th ray in them. I pledge. I play my part with stern resolve, with earnest aspiration. I look above, I help below. I dream not, nor I rest. I toil, I serve, I reap, I pray, I mount the cross, I tread the way. I tread upon the work I do, I mount upon my slain self. I kill desire, and I strive, forgetting all reward. I forego peace, I forfeit rest, and in the stress of pain, I lose myself and find myself invoking my higher self. To all this I most solemnly pledge myself, invoking my higher self. So, you know, there's lots of 6th ray in that, right? And kind of a invitation to think of these spiritual endeavors as the only important things, and one may overlook one's evident karma during this period, because apparently more important things have come into view. But you know, you have to fulfill Bethlehem before you can go on to the other stages of the life of Master Jesus, or the initiate Jesus. And until we have fulfilled Bethlehem, moving on will just leave unfinished business behind us, which will have to be dealt with at some point and will cause future delay. He will be continually swept off his feet with new ideals, new isms, new modes of living, new dreams for race betterment. Swept off his feet. We have to learn how to stand steady in the light, and if we're swept off our feet, it can't end well, can it? We'll either fall down or be thrown into the water, or we will not be reliable, because if any current comes along and we're in cooperation with someone trying to do something, suddenly we're not there. We're swept away. He will take up one cult after another as they seem to make possible the coming millennium. We all know people like this. Of course, in the case of Annie Besant, she was an initiate, and yet there was a book called The Last 5 Lives of Annie Besant. She had a lot of sixth-ray, probably sixth-ray personality, I think. And she did go from one mode of expressing discipleship to another with rather startling rapidity, until she finally wound up in theosophy. But there was a lot of social activism first and so forth, including the whole work with the family and things of that nature. And she was high in the game, But for others, it's just from one thing to the next, and every pursuit is at last the answer to what one has been looking for, only to find that it fades in its attractiveness, and the opening seems to close, a shutter closes, and the follower stumbles in the dark, under the sixth law of repulse. But after a time, he regains his poise. There's Libra again, right? A good Libran incarnation should help. And purpose assumes control of his life. He works at his own job and carries forward his contribution to the activity of the whole to the best of his ability. Without instability and chasing after ever new and better possibilities. It's just necessary to have that widening point of view about the life of the aspirant, life of aspiration, and not that easy to have, but Master DK, in his wisdom, presents to us the different phases through which we might pass, and then we will recognize that indeed we are passing through that, and we will start to put our aspiration and our intent treading of the path in proportion with the wider picture of the kinds of developments that we can expect on the path from life to life, from stage to stage, from initiation to initiation. Now, the next thing will be increased psychic sensitiveness. All right. So we're seeing what's happening here, as we, what should we say, he's not aware that he's being supervised on the inner planes, but there are evidences that this is happening in the mental activity, in responsiveness to the plan, and in increased psychic sensitiveness. This is both an indication of growth and at the same time a test. He is apt to be taken in by the allurement of the psychic powers. He will be tempted to sidetrack his efforts from specialized service to the race into the exploitation of the psychic powers and their use for self-assertion. Well, people think, well, that would never happen to me. But it's so easy to slide into that condition. And, one wants to be high in the opinion of others due to one's psychic powers. Of course, it's oftentimes very hard to recognize the motive behind why we do what we do. And as Master DK talked about himself at one point, he made a big mistake, and his master warned him about caring a bit too much for himself. But in fact, Master DK says, well, I only care for you. I'm devoted to you. And later, as he tells us, he learned the hard way, falling to earth of his own weight and learning that his real dedication was to himself and not to the master as much as he thought. Of course, Master DK has demonstrated, from everything I can see, a powerful sixth ray, and he has been extremely devoted to Master KH and full of zeal, The aspirant has to grow in all parts of his nature, but until he can function as the soul, the true psyche, this is the true psyche, not just that which produces the subtle vehicles producing psychism, because it's, we say psychic, and we tend to forget that the soul is the true psyche, and we think that the lower psychic powers belong to the subtle vehicles, pertain to the psyche, but not really in the deeper sense. But until he can function as the soul, the psyche, consciously and with the use of cooperative intelligence, you might almost say this is a Venus factor. The lower powers must be quiescent, and where they are not, we can have real trouble and delusion and sidetracking, where they are retained without true mental focus. We can have illusion, delusion really, and sidetracking. Happens all the time, and everybody says, oh, that's for other people. It won't happen to me. But if it's happened to others, it can happen to you. I oftentimes quote the statement, what man has done, man can do. But it's also true that what has befallen man can befall you, us. So we must be humble in these matters and be careful when we are warned. They can only be safely used by advanced disciples and initiates, and this is basically close to or after the third degree. They are weapons and instruments of service to be then used in the three worlds by those who are still tied by the law of rebirth to those worlds. Weapons and instruments of service. We have to be careful that we do not inflict upon others the weapon nature of these powers. I'm thinking about that beam of light, that's in the meditation on the dispelling of glamour, whether individual or group glamour. It's sort of like the lighted horn of the unicorn. It is obviously a weapon of destruction of glamour. And it's also a method of detecting the presence of glamour. So it can make important changes on the astral plane, but it is a weapon that every time we read about the unicorn, we realize that when it fights the king of beasts, who is the unregenerate personality, it uses its long horn as a weapon. But of course, through that horn can also come advanced forms of revelation. So anyway, when we are tied by the world, by the law of rebirth to the three worlds, we can use these lower powers guided by the higher psychic powers. The lower psychic powers should be guided by the higher psychic powers, but not until we've reached a certain stage of advancement is it really possible to cultivate the higher psychic powers. And they're on that list. You know, you've seen the list. This is the list. Keith Bailey made this compendium, you know, bringing a lot of information together for the benefit of many. And when we're dealing with spiritual discernment, group vibration, telepathy, those are all higher psychic powers. Comprehension of the four sounds, healing, divine vision, intuition, idealism, higher psychic powers, and on into still greater cities and powers that are used by the masters themselves, focused on the atmic plane, beatitude, active service, realization, perfection, and finally all knowledge. We do remember that the great Master R in his incarnation as Sir Francis Bacon replied to his uncle, who did not quite approve of his pursuits. He said modestly, I take all knowledge as my province. I take all knowledge as my province. So that's the very highest of the powers that have been offered to us as existing. There are others, of course. Those who have passed through the great liberation and have occultly crossed the bridge have no need to employ the powers inherent in the lower sheaths. What is that bridge? Is it into the monad, or still farther beyond the cosmic physical plane? Well, the masters occasionally use these, and they have crossed the bridge that we call the Antakarana. So I don't think it's the Antakarana, because the higher initiates and masters can use those psychic powers, but farther and farther, when one is a liberated monad, no use to use things that seem very vestigial, really. They can use the infallible knowledge of the intuition and the principle of, and the illumination of the principle of light. So these are triadal powers. They have crossed the Antakaranic bridge, and as members of the hierarchy, they are developing these powers fully. They are masters of the lower 18 subplanes and are being schooled in the work of the cosmic ethers. Well, okay, this is going to be a new subject. So here we're going to end of a treatise on white magic, video commentary 5.3, and page 166. To what? To what? To what? To page 169. All right. And we'll beginning, keep it blue, beginning of a treatise on white magic, video commentary 5.4, page 169 onward. And what day is this? Occasionally I do put in the day. This is the 8th of February, 2018. I never know quite when I'm going to be able to begin. It could be within a minute or two, or days can pass with other responsibilities. Well, you know, we're just getting started. We are exploring This book, what I'm trying to do is sort of send out filaments, send out tendrils, send out lines of lighted connection to many things in the teaching, so that everything we read is read in a fuller context. Obviously, it helps to have read all of this once already, and then the connections can be more meaningful. Okay. Right. So. We are somewhere. I think something just, yeah. It went back far. It went back far. But here we are anyway, and we are about ready to begin. Let's see. And this is video commentary number 37. I hope that's correct. I guess I'd be able to see that for sure if I go over here and the documents and number 30. No. It's number 38. So end of video commentary number 38, and beginning video number 39. Okay, and commentary 5.4. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and remember that this little offering is just the beginning, of really deep penetration into the teaching, but at least it should help get us going. Obviously, you have to be highly motivated to read these things on your own and persist in the reading and in the study and the meditation about them. But hopefully the interconnectedness of things will be aided by the kind of work I'm attempting to do here. So all the best to you, and we'll see you before long with number 39.